The convoy rolled through the Arizona desert at dawn, 3 Humvees and an armored ambulance painted with prominent red crosses that were supposed to mean something to people who still believed in rules. Staff Sergeant Morgan Riley sat behind the wheel of the ambulance, both hands steady on the steering wheel, as sand kicked up by the lead vehicle coated her windshield in a fine brown haze. The rising sun painted the horizon in shades of amber and gold, silhouetting the distant mountains against a sky gradually shifting from purple to blue. Morgan's eyes constantly scanned her surroundings, not just the terrain ahead, but the ridgelines, the shallow depressions, the scattered vegetation that could conceal threats. Old habits that had kept her alive through 3 deployments to Afghanistan. She'd been driving ambulances at Fort Liberty for exactly 3 weeks, and in that time she'd become completely invisible to everyone who mattered. The radio crackled with routine chatter as the convoy approached the base perimeter. Eagle 6 to convoy, you are clear for approach, over. Copy, Eagle 6, ETA 3 minutes, replied the lead Humvee driver. Morgan guided the ambulance through the checkpoint with practiced ease, nodding to the gate guards who barely glanced at her. Just another supply run completed. Just another day of driving while real soldiers did real work. Fort Liberty sprawled across the Arizona desert like a small city, a complex of buildings, training facilities, and barracks that housed over 5,000 military personnel. Originally constructed during the Cold War as a forward operating base for nuclear response teams, it had evolved into one of America's premier special operations training centers. The past and present existed side by side: Cold War-era bunkers and modern tactical training facilities, old concrete barriers, and new composite defensive systems. Morgan parked in the motor pool and began her post-mission checks with methodical precision that would have seemed obsessive if anyone had been paying attention. But nobody was paying attention to the ambulance driver. She checked the tire pressure with a digital gauge, inspected the undercarriage for damage, and methodically documented fluid levels in her maintenance log. Her movements were efficient, economical, the kind that came from years of discipline and training far beyond what was required to drive an ambulance. Across the motor pool, Staff Sergeant Jackson Reynolds and his fire team were loading gear into a tactical vehicle. Their conversation carried clearly across the quiet morning air. "I heard they're assigning us a driver for the next op," Specialist Wilson said, checking the magazine on his M4A1 before securing it in the rack. Reynolds scoffed, a sound that carried his 15 years of combat experience and the arrogance that came with it. At 38, he wore his experience like armor: 3 combat tours in Iraq, including Desert Storm, and the chest full of commendations he made sure everyone knew about. "Please tell me it's not the ambulance girl again," Wilson continued. "Last time she nearly bottomed out on that wash crossing." Reynolds laughed, the sound carrying clearly to where Morgan was checking tire pressure. "Riley, she's fine for supply runs, I guess. Point A to point B without getting lost. But actual combat operations, she'd probably freeze up the first time she heard incoming fire." "I don't know why they even sent her here," Corporal Davis added, adjusting the ACOG scope on his rifle. "We've got plenty of personnel who can drive and fight. What's the point of someone who can only do one?" Davis was built like a linebacker with arms covered in tattoos commemorating fallen brothers from previous deployments. His skepticism about female combat personnel was well known, though he kept it just professional enough to avoid formal complaints. Private First Class Ramirez, the youngest and quietest of the group, didn't join the mockery, but didn't contradict it either. The implicit agreement was clear. Morgan Riley was dead weight, a warm body filling a slot that could have gone to someone useful. Morgan continued her checks without visible reaction. The words slid off because she'd learned years ago that people who talked most about their capabilities were rarely the ones who delivered when situations turned desperate. She finished her inspection, logged her mileage, and headed toward the barracks for some rack time before her next shift. But Lieutenant Colonel William Bill Harrison had been watching from the maintenance bay, and what he saw didn't match what everyone else was seeing. At 62, Harrison was a living relic of America's shadowy Cold War operations. His weathered face and steel gray hair told stories of missions that would never appear in any official record. After 30 years in naval special warfare, including classified operations in East Germany and other hotspots behind the Iron Curtain, he transitioned to an advisory role at Fort Liberty. Officially, he was a security consultant. Unofficially, he was the institutional memory of American special operations, the quiet keeper of lessons paid for in blood. Harrison noticed things others missed. The way Morgan moved around the vehicle showed awareness beyond basic driver training, the constant visual scanning, the way she positioned herself to maintain maximum situational awareness. During the morning security briefing, she had positioned herself facing entry points back never to open spaces. And her personal weapon, the M4 carbine all soldiers carried, showed signs of maintenance that went far beyond standard requirements. The rifle was clean enough to pass white glove inspection, but more than that, it was configured in a very specific way that Harrison had only seen once before in a classified briefing about maritime special operations. The sling mounting the positioning of the tactical light, the grip angle, all reflected specialized close-quarters battle training that ambulance drivers simply didn't receive. One evening, he found her in the motor pool after hours reorganizing the medical supplies in her ambulance. The standard loadout was good, but she was modifying it. Trauma supplies positioned for one-handed access in low-light conditions. Tourniquets packed for rapid deployment. Hemostatic agents arranged in the exact configuration used by special operations medics. "That's an interesting setup you have got there, Riley," Harrison commented from the doorway, keeping his tone neutral. Morgan's hands paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing their work. "Just optimizing for efficiency, sir. Making sure everything's accessible if we take casualties during transport." "That's not standard ambulance configuration," Harrison observed. "That's combat medic loadout for high-threat environments." His observation carried professional curiosity rather than accusation. She looked at him with brown eyes that revealed absolutely nothing about what she was thinking. "Previous assignment had some unique requirements, sir. Old habits die hard." Harrison let it drop, but he filed the observation with others that were accumulating into a profile that didn't match her official personnel record. Everyone who deployed to places like Fort Liberty carried secrets from previous assignments. Most people just hid them more effectively. The intelligence brief arrived on a Tuesday morning with the kind of casual delivery that suggested nobody in the command structure truly believed the threat assessment they were distributing. Base Commander Colonel Catherine Miller, a 20-year veteran with silver-streaked black hair and the crisp efficiency of someone who had broken multiple glass ceilings, stood before the assembled department heads in the command center. Intelligence reports increased activity among a domestic extremist group calling themselves the Patriots. She explained, her voice matter-of-fact, as satellite imagery appeared on the screen behind her. "Mostly former military, dishonorably discharged. They've established a compound 50 miles northeast of the base." The imagery showed a remote desert location with several buildings, firing ranges, and what appeared to be improvised explosive device training areas. "They've acquired military-grade weapons, including rocket-propelled grenades and possibly heavy machine guns," Miller continued. "Chatter suggests they're planning something significant, possibly against military installations in the region." She paused, looking around the conference room at faces displaying expressions ranging from genuine concern to obvious boredom. "Most concerning," she added, her voice dropping slightly, "is intelligence suggesting they may have inside help, someone with knowledge of our security protocols and layout." That statement cut through the complacency. The possibility of an infiltrator or insider threat changed the calculus significantly. "Enhanced security protocols are now in effect," Miller concluded. "Increased perimeter patrols, ID verification at all checkpoints, and restricted movement protocols during identified high-risk periods." Questions? Staff Sergeant Reynolds raised his hand. "Ma'am, my team is scheduled for night operations training tomorrow. Will that be affected?" "Proceed as planned, but with additional security measures," Miller replied. "Coordinate with Lieutenant Colonel Harrison for detailed threat assessment." Nobody else raised questions or expressed concerns worth discussing. They'd received virtually identical threat warnings monthly for over a year. Nothing had ever materialized beyond occasional suspicious activity reports and rare security probes of the perimeter. Morgan heard about the intelligence brief third-hand, reading the sanitized summary posted on the operations board in the motor pool. Her reaction differed fundamentally from her colleagues' casual dismissal. She spent extra time during her vehicle inspections that day checking systems that went beyond standard maintenance requirements. She verified that her personal weapon had a full combat load of ammunition and that her spare magazines were properly maintained. She reviewed escape routes from various locations throughout the base and identified covered positions that could provide protection during an attack. Just mental exercises, she told herself. Professional habits from that previous career she'd left behind. But survival instincts forged in desperate circumstances didn't conveniently fade just because official paperwork said you had a different job. That night, as most of the base settled into evening routines, Private First Class Ramirez was making his way across the compound when he heard a groan from behind the maintenance building. He found a junior enlisted man sprawled on the ground, clutching his arm at an unnatural angle. "Help!" the soldier gasped. "Fell off the loading dock. Think my arm's broken." Ramirez knelt beside him, unsure what to do beyond basic first aid. That's when Morgan appeared, moving quickly but calmly from the direction of the motor pool. "Let me see," she said, kneeling opposite Ramirez. Her hands moved with confident precision, assessing the injury with practiced efficiency. "Compound fracture. We need to stabilize before moving him." What happened next left Ramirez speechless. Morgan produced a compact medical kit from her cargo pocket and deployed a tactical splint with the smooth efficiency of someone who had treated dozens of combat injuries under fire. Her hands never hesitated. Her voice remained calm as she explained each step to the injured soldier. "This will hurt," she warned before manipulating the bone back into proper alignment. The soldier bit back a scream, but Morgan's hands were so sure, so precise that the pain was minimized. Within minutes, she had the arm immobilized in a professional splint that looked like something from an emergency room rather than field medicine. "Ramirez, help me get him to the medical facility," she directed. "Keep the arm elevated at this exact angle." As they transported the injured soldier, Ramirez couldn't help but wonder where an ambulance driver had learned such advanced medical skills. Morgan caught his questioning glance and simply said, "Previous assignment." Later that week, Harrison slipped into the personnel office after hours. As a senior advisor with security clearance well above most on base, he had access to restricted files, but what he was doing now pushed the boundaries of proper procedure. Something about Riley didn't add up, and in his experience, inconsistencies often pointed to deeper truths. He pulled her personnel file from the secured database. On the surface, it was unremarkable: basic combat training at Fort Jackson, advanced individual training as a combat medic, 3 years of conventional service, including 1 deployment to Afghanistan, then specialized vehicle training leading to her current ambulance driver assignment. But Harrison had spent decades identifying patterns in seemingly random data. The file was too clean, too linear. No commendations, but no disciplinary actions either. Performance reviews that were positive but generic. It read like a cover identity professional, enough to withstand casual scrutiny, but lacking the normal peaks and valleys of a genuine military career. He dug deeper, using special access codes to query databases that most base personnel didn't even know existed. Nothing. Either Morgan Riley was exactly what her file said, a competent but unremarkable ambulance driver, or her real record was classified at a level even Harrison couldn't access without raising flags. Harrison's instincts, honed through decades of covert operations, told him it was the latter, and he'd learned never to ignore those instincts. The next day, Harrison positioned himself in the chow hall where he could observe Morgan's table without being obvious. She ate efficiently, minimizing her vulnerable time in the open space. Her selection of seating gave her clear sightlines to all entrances. Even her tray placement created a small barrier between herself and the open area, a subtle defensive position technique taught to operators who might need to eat in hostile territories. When Reynolds and his team entered and took a table nearby, Harrison watched Morgan's reaction closely. They were loud, dominating the space with war stories and inside jokes. Morgan showed no reaction beyond a slight tension in her shoulders when Reynolds began another story clearly designed to emphasize his combat prowess. "So there we were, pinned down outside Fallujah," Reynolds was saying, gesturing with his fork. "Enemy fire coming from 3 directions, no air support for at least 30 minutes. Davis here was hitting the plate, knocked him flat. I had to drag his sorry ass 50 meters under fire to get to cover." Davis nodded along, adding details to enhance the story's impact. "Reynolds here single-handedly held off 6 tangos while Wilson called in coordinates." Morgan finished her meal and stood to leave just as Reynolds delivered his punchline. "That's the difference between operators and support personnel. When it all goes to hell, you find out who can actually fight and who just drives the vehicles." The comment wasn't directed at her specifically, but the timing made it unmistakable. Harrison watched for a reaction, but Morgan simply deposited her tray and exited the hall without acknowledging the implied insult. Later that afternoon, Harrison met with Colonel Miller in her office, a Spartan space dominated by maps and operational charts rather than personal mementos. "What's your assessment of the threat?" Miller asked without preamble. "The Patriots have the capability and motivation," Harrison replied. "Their leader, James Mercer, was Special Forces before his dishonorable discharge for extremist views. He knows our protocols, possibly our layout." Miller frowned. "And the insider threat possibility? Can't rule it out. Someone's been feeding them information, detailed shift schedules, patrol patterns, things only someone with base access would know." Miller pinched the bridge of her nose. "Recommendations: rotate security protocols, change patrol patterns, and quietly review personnel who've transferred in within the last 6 months." "Already underway." Miller nodded. "Anything else?" Harrison hesitated, then decided to trust his instincts. "Staff Sergeant Morgan Riley, the ambulance driver. Something's not right with her background." Miller raised an eyebrow. "Riley, she's been here, 3 weeks, keeps her head down, does her job. Why the interest?" "Her file's too clean, and she moves wrong for an ambulance driver." "Moves wrong," Miller repeated skeptically. "She has operator awareness kernel, constantly scanning, always positioned for maximum situational awareness. Her weapon maintenance is special operations standard, and she's reconfigured her ambulance medical loadout for combat trauma scenarios." Miller considered this. "You think she's the inside threat?" Harrison shook his head. "No, I think she's something else entirely, something her file doesn't show." "Keep an eye on her," Miller decided. "Discreetly. If there's something there, I want to know before this situation with the Patriots escalates." That night, Morgan performed her own reconnaissance of the base. Not the official layout that appeared on maps, but the hidden infrastructure that dated back to the Cold War. Fort Liberty had been constructed with nuclear war in mind, which meant escape tunnels, hidden access points, and emergency evacuation routes that had largely been forgotten in the decades since. During her first week, she had discovered an old drainage culvert that ran beneath the eastern perimeter, large enough for a person to move through. She'd also identified 3 blind spots in the perimeter surveillance system, where the older camera networks interfaced imperfectly with newer technologies. Vulnerabilities that would be obvious to anyone with the right training, the kind of training James Mercer and his Patriots would have. As she carefully documented these weaknesses in her mental map, Morgan heard footsteps approaching. She melted into the shadows beside a maintenance shed, her body automatically assuming the minimum profile to avoid detection, a skill taught nowhere in ambulance driver training. Harrison passed within 10 feet of her position, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who also knew how to move unseen. He paused, scanning the area as if sensing her presence, then continued toward the eastern perimeter. Morgan waited until he was well past before emerging from concealment. Whatever game Harrison was playing, he clearly suspected something about her. The question was how much he knew and what he planned to do with that knowledge. The next morning, Morgan was performing maintenance on her ambulance when Reynolds and his team approached, geared up for a training exercise. "Riley," Reynolds called, "Command wants you to drive us to the training area. Our regular driver's down with stomach flu." Morgan nodded, wiping her hands on a shop rag. "When do you need to leave?" 10 minutes. Eastern Training Area, the urban combat site. The Eastern Training Area was the most remote facility on base, a mock urban environment used for close quarters battle training. It was also the closest base facility to the Patriots' compound, though still miles away. "I'll be ready," she said simply. Reynolds lingered while his team loaded their gear. "Just so we're clear, Riley, this is a live fire exercise. When we get there, you stay with the vehicle. This isn't a place for support personnel to play soldier." "Clear." She met his gaze without expression. "Crystal clear, Staff Sergeant." The drive to the training area took 40 minutes across increasingly rough terrain. Morgan navigated the route with precision, choosing lines through the rocky landscape that minimized vehicle stress and maximized stability, driving techniques taught at advanced tactical mobility courses, not basic transportation training. Reynolds noticed, "Where'd you learn to drive like that?" "Previous assignment." Morgan replied the same answer she always gave, which was what exactly Reynolds pressed. "Medical transport in Afghanistan, Helmand Province." Reynolds studied her profile. Helmand was hot. "You see combat." "Some," she acknowledged without elaboration. The conversation died as they approached the training area. The mock urban environment spread across 5 acres concrete buildings arranged to simulate a small town, complete with narrow streets, multi-story structures, and hidden spaces perfect for ambush scenarios. Park here, Reynolds directed as they reached the staging area. We'll be about 4 hours. Stay with the vehicle monitor, the radio, emergency response protocol, if you hear anything unusual. Understood, Morgan replied, shifting into her invisible ambulance driver persona as Reynolds and his team unloaded their gear and moved toward the training area. She watched them go, noting their movement patterns, equipment configuration, and team spacing. Reynolds ran a disciplined unit despite his arrogance. Their formation was textbook, their weapons handling professional. They disappeared into the mock urban environment, and soon the distinctive sound of blanks being fired echoed across the desert. Morgan settled in to wait, but kept her situational awareness high. Something felt off about this assignment. Why send an ambulance driver with a tactical team for a routine training exercise? Emergency medical response teams were typically on standby back at base, not forward deployed with training units. 30 minutes later, her radio crackled. All units be advised. Perimeter sensors on the eastern boundary report possible intrusion. Security teams responding. All personnel maintain current positions and heightened awareness. Morgan straightened her hand, automatically checking her sidearm. The eastern boundary was less than 2 miles from their current position. If there was an actual intrusion, Reynolds' team was the closest response force available. She keyed her to. Eagle Tactical, this is medical transport. Did you copy last transmission about eastern boundary? Reynolds' voice came back tense but controlled. Copy that, medical transport, holding position and continuing exercise until further orders. Morgan scanned the horizon, looking for any sign of movement or dust that might indicate vehicles approaching. Nothing yet, but her instincts were firing warning signals. The timing was too coincidental, a potential breach near where Reynolds' elite team happened to be training with only an ambulance driver as support. It felt like a setup. She made a decision then, one that went against her orders, but aligned with her training, her real training. She secured the ambulance and moved on foot toward an elevated position that would give her better visibility of both the training area and the approach from the eastern boundary. From her new vantage point, using the compact binoculars she always carried, Morgan could see the entire training facility. Reynolds' team was moving through the mock town with tactical precision, building to building, room to room. They were good, their movements coordinated, their sectors of fire properly, managed their communication disciplined. She shifted her view to the desert beyond the facility, scanning methodically for any sign of approach. At first, nothing. Then a flash of reflected sunlight from a ridge about a mile east, the kind of reflection that might come from a scope or binoculars. Someone was watching. Morgan focused on the ridge, waiting patiently until she spotted movement. 2 figures in desert camouflage observing the training facility with professional interest. Not base security who would have announced their presence. Observers studying Reynolds' team's tactics and patterns. She keyed her radio again. Eagle Tactical Medical Transport. Be advised, I have visual on 2 unknown individuals observing your exercise from the eastern ridge, approximately 1 mile out. Possible hostile reconnaissance. Reynolds' voice came back immediately. Medical transport, what's your position? You were ordered to stay with the vehicle. Elevated observation point 200 meters northeast of the vehicle. Morgan replied without apology. Clear line of sight to unknown observers. They appear to be documenting your movement patterns. A tense silence followed then. Hold position, we're coming to you. Within minutes, Reynolds and his team had reached Morgan's position, moving with the silent efficiency of professionals. Reynolds didn't waste time on recriminations for her disobeying orders. The situation had changed. Show me, he said simply. Morgan handed him the binoculars and indicated the ridge where she'd spotted the observers. There. 2 individuals prone position using optics to watch your exercise. Reynolds studied the ridge for a long moment. I see them. Not our people. He turned to his team. Wilson, call it in. Davis Ramirez establish security perimeter. We hold until QRF arrives. As Wilson made the call, Reynolds turned to Morgan. How did you spot them? Reflection off their optics, she answered. Amateur mistake. Reynolds studied her with new interest. And you just happened to be in an overwatch position instead of with your vehicle where you were ordered to stay. Morgan met his gaze steadily. Something felt wrong about this whole setup. Why send an ambulance driver alone with a tactical team for a routine exercise? It didn't make sense unless someone wanted to isolate you out here. Before Reynolds could respond, the radio crackled again. All units be advised. Security breach confirmed at eastern boundary. 4 armed individuals penetrated perimeter. Quick reaction force en route ETA 15 minutes. All non-essential personnel return to base immediately. Reynolds looked at Morgan, then back to the ridge where the observers were now moving, apparently aware they'd been spotted. Those two were spotters, Morgan said quietly. The main element is coming from another direction. How would you know that? Reynolds demanded. Because it's what I would do, Morgan replied. And these guys have training. Just then, the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle split the air, and a round impacted 3 feet from their position, sending rock fragments flying. Contact! Davis shouted, bringing his weapon up. Reynolds made a split-second decision. Fall back to the training facility. Better cover defensive positions. Move now. As they retreated toward the mock town, more shots followed, forcing them to move from cover to cover. Morgan kept pace easily, her movements fluid, and practiced nothing like someone who just drove ambulances. When they reached the first building, Reynolds turned to his team. Wilson, get on the radio, keep trying to reach base. We need air support. Davis Ramirez established fields of fire covering the northern and eastern approaches. He turned to Morgan. Riley, you need a weapon, she finished in foreign, her voice calm but insistent. I can fight Reynolds. He hesitated only briefly before unholstering his sidearm, a Sig Sauer P226, and handing it to her. 9 rounds, make them count. Morgan checked the weapon with practiced ease, her movements so fluid and automatic that Reynolds couldn't help but notice. I will, she said simply. They had just established their defensive position when Wilson returned, his expression grim. Radio's being jammed, can't get through to base. Cell phones? Reynolds asked. No signal out here, Davis replied. We're on our own until QRF finds us. Morgan was studying the terrain through a narrow window. They're setting up for a coordinated assault, she observed. 3-man team moving to flank from the west, while the marksman keeps us pinned from the east. Reynolds moved to her position, confirming her assessment with his own observations. How the hell do you see that? They're using standard small unit tactics, Morgan explained. The shots aren't meant to hit us, just keep us focused eastward, while their main element maneuvers into position. Reynolds stared at her. Who are you really, Riley? Before she could answer, a new sound cut through the air, the distinctive thump of a grenade launcher firing. Down, Morgan shouted, grabbing Reynolds and pulling him away from the window, an instant before an explosion tore through the wall, showering them with concrete fragments. Davis was hit by debris, a jagged piece of concrete slicing across his forehead. Blood poured down his face as he struggled to maintain his firing position. I've got him, Morgan said, moving to Davis with medical supplies already in hand. She worked with calm precision, applying a pressure dressing to control the bleeding while maintaining awareness of the tactical situation around them. How bad? Reynolds asked. Scalp wound looks worse than it is, Morgan assessed, but he's going to need stitches, and we need to watch for signs of concussion. Another explosion rocked the building closer this time. Their position was becoming untenable. We need to move, Morgan said. This building's too exposed. The structure 2 blocks west has better fields of fire and multiple exit points. Reynolds looked at her sharply. How do you know the layout that well? I study maps, she replied simply. It's what I do. Reynolds made the call. Okay, we move in pairs. Wilson, you and Ramirez first. Davis and I will follow. Riley, you. I'll cover the rear, she finished checking the SIG's magazine. Go, I'll be right behind you. As Wilson and Ramirez prepared to move, gunfire erupted from multiple positions, pinning them down more effectively. They were surrounded, outgunned, with a wounded man and no communications. Change of plans, Reynolds said grimly. We hold position, conserve ammunition. QRF will be looking for us. We just need to survive until they arrive. Morgan shook her head. They're jamming communications. QRF won't know exactly where to find us, and these guys will have finished us off by then. She paused, making a decision. I need to tell you something, Reynolds. Now's not the time for confessions, Riley, he snapped, firing a controlled burst toward movement he'd spotted. Now's exactly the time, she countered. I'm not just an ambulance driver. My previous assignment was with Naval Special Warfare Development Group. I operated with SEAL Team 6 for 7 years, including direct action missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and places you don't have clearance to know about. Reynolds stared at her, disbelief warring with the evidence of his own eyes. Her composure under fire, her tactical awareness, her weapons handling. Why would a Tier 1 operator be driving ambulances at Fort Liberty? He demanded. Transition program, Morgan explained quickly. Operators who've done extended classified work eventually rotate into conventional forces, necessary for psychological health, career progression, and to prevent burnout. I volunteered. Another explosion rocked the building closer this time. Dust rained down from the ceiling. If what you're saying is true, Reynolds said, then what's your assessment of our situation? Morgan didn't hesitate. We're facing at least 6 trained combatants, former military, based on their tactics. They isolated us out here deliberately. This isn't random. It's a coordinated operation with specific objectives, probably part of a larger attack plan. Reynolds processed this information, his tactical mind working through the implications. Recommendations. I need to get behind them, Morgan said. Disrupt their command and control, create confusion. There's a drainage culvert running along the eastern side of this facility large enough for one person to move through. It would put me behind their position. That's suicide, Davis objected, pressing the bandage to his forehead. It's what I'm trained for, Morgan countered. You hold this position, keep their attention forward. I'll hit them from behind, create enough chaos for you to break contact and reach the vehicle. Reynolds studied her for a long moment, weighing options, assessing risks, and finally recognizing the calm competence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Do it, he decided, but take this. He handed her his primary weapon, an M4 with ACOG scope and tactical light. More firepower than the pistol. Morgan accepted the rifle, checking it with practiced hands. I'll radio when I'm in position. 3 clicks means I'm starting my assault. When you hear that, be ready to move fast. She moved to the rear of the building, finding a partially collapsed section of wall that would allow her to slip out unseen. Before she disappeared, Reynolds caught her arm. Riley, he said, his earlier condescension replaced by professional respect. Who knows about your background? Morgan's expression was unreadable. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison suspects. He's been watching me since I arrived. She paused. If I don't make it back, tell him he was right. With that, she slipped through the opening and vanished into the swirling dust beyond, leaving Reynolds and his team to wonder who exactly they had been mocking for the past 3 weeks. As Morgan moved silently toward the drainage culvert, Harrison was in Colonel Miller's office reviewing security camera footage from the eastern perimeter breach. 4 armed individuals, he confirmed, pointing to the screen. Military training, specialized equipment. They knew exactly where the cameras were positioned and how to avoid direct identification. And now Reynolds' team is out there with no communication, Miller said grimly. QRF is en route, but with the jamming in effect, they're searching blind. Harrison's expression was thoughtful. Not entirely blind. Reynolds has Riley with him. Miller gave him a sharp look. The ambulance driver. What good is she in this situation? That's what I've been trying to tell you, Harrison replied. I don't think she's just an ambulance driver. And if I'm right, those attackers might have just made a fatal mistake. The drainage culvert was exactly where Morgan had remembered it, a 3-foot concrete tunnel running beneath the eastern edge of the training facility. She approached in a low crawl, using every available bit of cover to mask her movement from the enemy positions above. Years of operating in hostile territory had taught her the patience of a predator move when necessary, remain perfectly still when not. She reached the culvert entrance and paused, listening. The distinctive crack of rifle fire echoed across the training area as the attackers maintained pressure on Reynolds and his team. Good. Their attention was focused forward, not on their flanks or rear. Morgan slipped into the concrete passage, the cool darkness, a stark contrast to the blistering desert heat. The tunnel smelled of dust and old water, the concrete scarred with decades of flash flood marks. She moved with practiced stealth, her breathing controlled each foot placement, deliberate to avoid creating sound that might echo through the structure. This was familiar territory, not this specific tunnel, but the state of mind. The focused calm that descended when operating alone behind enemy lines. It was like slipping into an old, well-worn uniform that still fit perfectly. Above her, the battle continued. The attackers were well-equipped and trained, former military without question. Their fire discipline and tactical movement suggested Special Forces background, likely some of Mercer's Patriots, that the intelligence brief had warned about. The ambush had been carefully planned, designed to isolate and eliminate a high-value asset, Reynolds' elite tactical team. Morgan reached a junction where the culvert split. She paused, mentally tracing the likely route that would position her optimally behind the enemy force. Left would take her directly behind their most likely command position based on the terrain. She turned left. As she moved deeper into the tunnel system, her mind was already processing the engagement to follow. 6 hostiles, likely armed with M4 variants, possibly a designated marksman with a long rifle and at least 1 grenade launcher, against her single M4 with limited ammunition. The odds weren't good in a direct engagement, but she wasn't planning one. This would be a classic asymmetric warfare strike: disrupt, disappear, strike again. Back at the command center, Colonel Miller was coordinating the quick reaction force response while Harrison studied a topographical map of the training area. The drainage system, he muttered, his finger tracing blue lines that snaked across the map. Cold War era, designed for flash flood mitigation. He looked up at Miller. If Riley is what I think she is, that's the route she'll take. Miller frowned. You still haven't told me exactly what you think she is? Someone with specialized infiltration training, Harrison replied. The kind that teaches you to exploit existing infrastructure to move undetected through hostile territory. And why would an ambulance driver have that kind of training? Miller asked skeptically. That's the million-dollar question, Harrison said. But I suspect we're about to find out. At that moment, the radio crackled to life. Command, this is QRF. Approaching eastern boundary. No contact with Reynolds' team. Request guidance. Miller keyed her mic. QRF, this is Eagle 6. Proceed to training facility approach from the southwest. Be advised, hostiles have the high ground with superior fields of fire. Exercise extreme caution. Copy that, Eagle 6. ETA 8 minutes. Harrison shook his head. They'll be too late. Whatever's going to happen out there is already in motion. In the mock town, Reynolds and his team were running low on ammunition. Davis's wound had stopped bleeding, but the corporal was showing signs of concussion, dilated pupils, slowed responses, intermittent disorientation. How long since Riley left? Ramirez asked, keeping his voice low. Reynolds checked his watch. 18 minutes. He didn't need to add that if she'd been captured or killed, their situation was even more dire. You really believe she's some kind of super secret SEAL? Wilson asked, his skepticism evident despite the circumstances. I don't know what to believe, Reynolds admitted, but she moves different, thinks different. And right now, she's the only advantage we might have. A fresh barrage of gunfire peppered their position, forcing them deeper into cover. The attackers were becoming more aggressive, sensing weakness, or perhaps growing impatient with the standoff. They're preparing to rush us, Reynolds assessed grimly. Final positions. Make every round count. His radio emitted 3 quick clicks the signal. Morgan was in position. We'll stand by, Reynolds ordered, a fresh surge of hope energizing his voice. On my command, prepare to move toward the southern exit. Riley's about to create our opportunity. Morgan had reached an ideal position, a partially collapsed section of the culvert that opened onto a shallow depression 30 meters behind the enemy's main firing line. From her vantage point, she could see 5 attackers, 3 maintaining fire on Reynolds' position, 1 with a grenade launcher scanning for targets of opportunity, and a 5th, likely the leader, coordinating their movements. All wore tactical gear without insignia, their faces obscured by balaclavas and tactical sunglasses. Professional equipment, professional spacing, professional fire discipline. These weren't random extremists, they were trained operators gone rogue. She identified her targets in order of priority: grenade launcher first, then the leader, then the rifleman. She would have seconds at most before they realized they were being engaged from behind and adjusted their positions. Morgan took 3 measured breaths, centering herself in the moment. Then she emerged from cover and engaged. Her first shot caught the grenade launcher operator at the base of the skull, dropping him instantly before he could react. The second and third shots found the leader's center mass in a controlled pair that punched through his body armor at the seam, a kill shot taught only in advanced close-quarters combat courses. The remaining 3 attackers reacted with professional speed, but Morgan was already moving to a secondary position, executing the shoot-move-shoot tactics that had kept her alive through 187 missions. Confusion erupted in the enemy ranks as they tried to identify the new threat while maintaining pressure on Reynolds' team. Their disciplined formation dissolved as they turned to face attacks from two directions. Now, Reynolds ordered, recognizing the moment Morgan had created. Move south leapfrog pattern. Wilson, you're first. Ramirez, help me with Davis. As Reynolds' team began their fighting withdrawal, Morgan continued her systematic disruption of the enemy force. A fourth attacker fell to her precisely aimed fire as he tried to flank her position. The fifth managed to get off a burst in her direction before her return fire found him. But even as the fifth attacker fell, Morgan spotted movement on the ridge to the east. The two observers she'd identified earlier were moving to support their comrades, and they had the high ground advantage. She keyed her radio. Reynolds, two more incoming from the east ridge. I'll delay them. Get to the vehicle. Copy that, Reynolds replied. We're moving. What about you? I'll find my own way out, Morgan assured him. Just be ready to extract fast when I reach you. Reynolds didn't argue. He'd seen enough in the past few minutes to know that Morgan Riley operated at a level beyond conventional soldiers. His team continued their withdrawal while Morgan engaged the new threat. The ridge observers were more cautious, having witnessed the systematic elimination of their companions. They used terrain for cover, making themselves difficult targets as they advanced. Morgan conserved ammunition, taking shots only when she had high probability hits. She managed to wound one, sending him scrambling for cover, but the second used the distraction to close distance. As Morgan shifted position again, a round caught her in the left shoulder, a clean through and through that missed bone but tore through muscle. The impact spun her sideways, but years of operating while injured allowed her to compartmentalize the pain. She rolled with the force, came up in a kneeling position, and put 2 rounds into her attacker's chest. Blood soaked her sleeve, but the wound wasn't immediately life-threatening. She applied a quick pressure bandage from her compact med kit, knowing that proper treatment would have to wait. The wounded observer had disappeared, likely retreating to a safer position or radioing for reinforcements. Either way, Morgan knew her window of opportunity was closing. She needed to reach Reynolds and his team before more hostiles arrived, or the wounded observer managed to reestablish an effective firing position. She worked her way south, using the Mocktown structures for cover, constantly scanning for threats. The training facility that had seemed so mundane during routine exercises had transformed into a genuine battlefield. Every shadow potentially concealed a threat, every exposed crossing a moment of vulnerability. Reynolds and his team had reached the staging area where they'd left the vehicles. The ambulance sat exactly where Morgan had parked it, apparently untouched, but Reynolds approached with appropriate caution. Wilson, check for tampering, he ordered. Explosive devices, tracking systems, anything unusual. Wilson performed a quick but thorough inspection. Clear, Sergeant. No visible tampering. Get Davis situated in the back, Reynolds directed. Ramirez, establish a perimeter. I'll try the radio again. The jamming that had blocked their communications earlier seemed to have ceased. Reynolds made contact with the approaching QRF, providing their position and status. Be advised, QRF, he added. We have a wounded team member and 1 operator still in the field. Staff Sergeant Riley. Staff Sergeant Riley, the ambulance driver, came the confused response. Affirmative, Reynolds replied without elaboration. She's engaged hostile forces to cover our withdrawal. Request immediate support at her last known position. Copy that. QRF will split elements. First team to your location for extraction, second team to search for Riley. Reynolds ended the transmission and scanned the training facility for any sign of Morgan. Nothing but dust and the occasional echo of distant gunfire. Should we wait for her? Ramirez asked, voicing what they were all thinking. Reynolds was torn between tactical necessity and leaving no one behind. Davis needed medical attention, and their exposed position made them vulnerable. But abandoning Morgan after what she'd done felt fundamentally wrong. 2 more minutes, he decided. Then we move with or without. The sound of an engine interrupted him, not from the direction of the base where QRF would approach, but from the east. A camouflage pickup truck crested a ridge, driving at high speed toward their position. Contact, Wilson shouted, bringing his weapon to bear. But before anyone could fire, they saw Morgan at the wheel, one hand steering while the other pressed a bandage to her shoulder. She skidded to a halt beside them in a cloud of dust. Borrowed transportation, she explained, her voice strained but controlled. More hostiles inbound from the northeast. We need to move now. Reynolds didn't waste time on questions. Davis in the ambulance. Wilson, you drive. Ramirez with Davis. Riley and I will follow in the truck to provide rear security. The plan was executed with military precision. Within moments, both vehicles were moving fast toward the base perimeter, Reynolds now driving the pickup, while Morgan maintained watch for pursuit. "How bad is the shoulder?" Reynolds asked, noting the blood-soaked bandage. "Through and through," Morgan replied matter-of-factly. "Missed anything vital. I've had worse." Reynolds nodded, accepting her assessment. "That was some of the most impressive combat work I've ever seen. 7 years with SEAL Team 6, you said." "That's the official version," Morgan acknowledged, wincing slightly as the truck bounced over rough terrain. "And the unofficial version," Morgan gave him a measured look. "Above your clearance level, Reynolds. No offense." He almost laughed. "None taken. I think I've learned enough about underestimating you for one day." They met the QRF convoy 5 minutes from the base perimeter, 3 armored Humvees with mounted weapons and a full tactical team. The QRF commander, Lieutenant Parker, approached as they pulled to a stop. "Reynolds," Parker acknowledged, "we've secured the approach to base. Medical team standing by." His eyes moved to Morgan, taking in her blood-soaked sleeve and the weapon held confidently in her good hand. "You must be Riley, the ambulance driver." "That's right," she replied without elaboration. Parker looked like he wanted to ask more questions, but instead focused on the tactical situation. "Any pursuit?" "Negative," Reynolds reported. "But there's at least one wounded hostile, unaccounted for, possibly more incoming. The training facility is compromised." "Understood. We'll escort you to base." "Second element is sweeping the area now. Colonel Miller wants an immediate debrief." As the convoy reformed with the ambulance and captured truck in the middle, Reynolds found himself reevaluating everything he thought he knew about Morgan Riley. The woman who had been invisible to him for 3 weeks had just saved his entire team with combat skills that surpassed his own considerable experience. The realization was humbling. All his combat decorations, all his elite training, and he had completely missed recognizing a genuine operator in his midst. Because she was driving an ambulance. Because she was a woman. Because he had allowed his assumptions to blind him. They passed through the base perimeter under heightened security. The main gate was fortified with additional barriers and personnel all on high alert. Whatever had happened at the training facility appeared to be part of a larger security situation. A medical team was waiting as they arrived at the base hospital. Davis was immediately taken for treatment, his condition stable but requiring attention. Another medic approached Morgan, eyeing her bloody shoulder. "I need to check that wound, Sergeant," the medic said. Morgan nodded. "After debrief. It's not critical." The medic started to object, but something in Morgan's expression stopped him. He handed her a fresh pressure bandage instead. "At least change that one, and report to medical immediately after your debrief." Reynolds, Morgan, Wilson, and Ramirez were escorted directly to the command center, where Colonel Miller and Lieutenant Colonel Harrison awaited them. The command center hummed with focused activity as personnel monitored communications and coordinated security responses throughout the base. Miller's expression was grave as they entered. "Report Staff Sergeant Reynolds." Reynolds provided a concise tactical summary of the ambush, the firefight, and their extraction. When he reached the part about Morgan's solo action against the attackers, Miller's eyes shifted to the wounded ambulance driver with new interest. "So Staff Sergeant Riley single-handedly neutralized 5 hostile operators, allowing your team to withdraw," Miller clarified. "Affirmative," Reynolds confirmed. "Without her intervention, we would likely have been overrun." Miller turned her attention to Morgan. "Would you care to explain how an ambulance driver possesses the tactical skills to engage and defeat multiple hostile operators, Sergeant Riley? Or should I ask why your personnel file fails to mention any special operations background?" Before Morgan could respond, Harrison stepped forward. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in a more secure setting, Colonel." Miller studied Harrison for a moment, then nodded. "Reynolds, have your team write up detailed statements and then get some rest. Riley, Harrison, my office. Now." As Reynolds and his team were dismissed, he caught Morgan's eye. The look that passed between them transcended their previous relationship. It was the silent acknowledgement that exists between professionals who have faced death together. In Miller's office, Morgan stood at parade rest despite her injury, facing the colonel's desk while Harrison closed the door. "Sit down before you fall down, Sergeant," Miller ordered, gesturing to a chair. "That shoulder needs proper attention." "I'm fine standing, ma'am," Morgan replied. That wasn't a suggestion, Miller said firmly. Morgan relented, taking the offered seat while maintaining perfect posture. Now, Miller continued, I have a base under possible attack, a team that was nearly lost in what appears to be a coordinated ambush, and an ambulance driver who suddenly demonstrates Tier 1 operator capabilities. I need answers, and I need them now. Harrison spoke first. Colonel, what I'm about to tell you is classified at a level that technically exceeds your clearance. I've received temporary authorization from higher to bring you in because of the current threat situation. Miller's eyebrows rose slightly, but she said nothing, waiting. Staff Sergeant Morgan Riley is not primarily an ambulance driver, Harrison continued. Her official record has been sanitized as part of a specialized transition program for deep cover operators returning to conventional forces. Miller looked at Morgan. Is this true, Sergeant? Morgan met her gaze steadily. Yes, ma'am. For the past 7 years, Harrison explained, Riley operated with Naval Special Warfare Development Group, what most people call SEAL Team 6, as part of a highly classified program called Ghost Protocol. The program embeds specially selected operators with extraordinary capabilities into support roles with critical mission teams. You're saying she's a SEAL? Miller asked skeptically. Not exactly, Harrison clarified. The program selects candidates from various special operations backgrounds, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, based on aptitude rather than service branch. Riley came to us from Army Special Forces, medical training, demonstrated exceptional capabilities in combat operations, and was recruited for Ghost Protocol. Morgan remained silent, letting Harrison provide the necessary context. The concept, Harrison continued, is to place these hyper-capable operators in positions that appear non-threatening. Medical support, logistics, communications roles that enemies typically ignore or underestimate. They serve as a built-in insurance policy for high-value teams operating in denied areas. If the primary operators are compromised, the Ghost activates to extract them or complete the mission. Miller processed this information, her tactical mind immediately grasping the strategic value. And Riley has been operating in this capacity for 7 years. 187 missions, Harrison confirmed. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and several other locations that don't appear in official documentation. A success rate that made her something of a legend in communities that don't hand out that designation lightly. Miller turned to Morgan. Why the transfer to conventional forces? Why drive ambulances at Fort Liberty? For the first time, Morgan spoke for herself. The transition program, ma'am. Operators who have done extended time in highly classified programs eventually need to rotate into conventional forces. It's necessary for long-term psychological health required for career progression beyond certain thresholds, and it allows us to integrate back into normal military life. She adjusted her position slightly, the only indication that her wound was causing discomfort. I volunteered for the transition. The terms were that I'd work a standard deployment performing conventional duties, integrate fully into a regular unit, and not advertise my background unless circumstances made it absolutely necessary. And today made it absolutely necessary, Miller concluded. Yes, ma'am, Morgan agreed. Reynolds and his team would have been killed. I made a tactical decision to break cover. Miller leaned back in her chair, absorbing the implications. And now we have a serious security situation on our hands. The attack on the training facility wasn't random. It was targeted, coordinated, and executed with professional precision. Part of a larger operation, Harrison added grimly. The Patriots have been planning this for months. The training facility ambush was likely a first phase eliminate one of our best tactical response teams before the main assault. Which means the main assault is still coming, Miller said, standing to look at the base map on her wall. Question is, what's their actual target? Morgan studied the map with professional interest. Based on their tactics and equipment, they're after something specific, not just a general terror attack. They want an asset. We have plenty of high-value assets, Miller replied. Weapons systems, classified communications equipment, personnel with access to sensitive information. There's also the special storage facility, Harrison said carefully. Miller shot him a warning look. That's not relevant to this discussion. Morgan caught the exchange. Ma'am, if you're referring to the tactical nuclear storage bunker on the north side of the base, I'm already aware of its existence. Both Miller and Harrington stared at her. Ghost Protocol operators are briefed on critical infrastructure at all major military installations. Morgan explained, in case we need to defend or deny access to sensitive sites during emergencies. Miller's face hardened. That facility's existence is classified at the highest levels. How many people in your Patriots group might know about it? If they have former Special Forces personnel like James Mercer, Morgan replied, then it's possible they know, and that would be a target worthy of this level of planning and resources. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. A domestic terrorist group attempting to access nuclear weapons was a nightmare scenario beyond ordinary security threats. Harrison broke the silence. The attack on Reynolds' team makes more sense now. They wanted to eliminate one of our best rapid response units before making their move on the storage facility. We need to heighten security immediately. Miller decided to reaching for her phone. A full lockdown protocols. I want additional personnel at all critical infrastructure, especially the north side storage areas. As Miller issued commands, Morgan stood carefully managing her injured shoulder with practiced discipline. You need medical attention, Sergeant, Harrison reminded her. After we secure the base, Morgan replied. I have experience with exactly this type of threat scenario. Miller finished her calls and turned back to them. Security teams are deploying now. Harrison, I want you to coordinate with base defense forces. Your experience with these old installations might help us identify vulnerability points. What about me, ma'am? Morgan asked. Miller studied her for a moment. Officially, you're relieved of duty for medical treatment. She paused. Unofficially, I need your expertise. You have demonstrated capabilities that could be critical if these terrorists make their move. But first, get that shoulder properly treated. That's an order. Yes, ma'am, Morgan acknowledged. As they prepared to leave, the base alarm system suddenly blared to life, a pulsing wail that indicated the highest level of security threat. Miller's radio crackled urgently. Colonel, this is North Perimeter Security. We have multiple breaches along the fence line. At least a dozen armed individuals have penetrated the outer barrier. They're using some kind of specialized cutting equipment to move through the reinforced sections. Before Miller could respond, another report came through. Command, this is main gate, explosion at the checkpoint. We have casualties and multiple hostile forces advancing through the breach. Request immediate support. A third transmission followed immediately. Eagle 6 power station security were under attack. They've disabled the main generators. Switching to backup power now. The command center's lights flickered, then stabilized as emergency systems engaged. Miller's expression was grim but resolute. It's begun. They're making coordinated strikes across the base to create confusion while their main element moves on the primary target. She looked at Morgan. Still think you're fit for duty, Sergeant? Morgan checked her weapon with her good hand, her movements precise despite the injury. Never been more ready, ma'am. Miller nodded, recognizing the look of a professional operator preparing for combat. Harrison, coordinate base defense from the command center. Riley, you're with me. We're heading to the armory first, then the north side storage facility. As they moved toward the door, Harrison caught Morgan's arm. Ghost Protocol has one primary directive above all others, he said quietly. Do you remember what it is? Morgan's expression was solemn. Protect the asset at all costs. Harrison nodded. In this case, the asset isn't a person. It's what's stored in that facility. If those weapons fall into terrorist hands, they won't, Morgan said with quiet certainty. Not while I'm breathing. Miller led the way from her office toward the command center's exit, already issuing orders through her radio. Morgan followed, moving with the controlled urgency of someone transitioning fully from cover identity to operational status. The base was transforming around them. Security personnel rushing to defensive positions, armored vehicles deploying to threatened sectors, the organized chaos of a military installation responding to direct attack. As they reached the main corridor, an explosion rocked the building much closer than the others. Lights flickered again and dust rained down from ceiling panels. They're inside the headquarters building. Miller realized, drawing her sidearm. We need an alternate route to the armory. Morgan was already scanning for options, her mind mapping the building's layout. Service corridor through the maintenance level, she suggested. Less direct but likely clear of hostiles at this stage. Miller nodded, impressed despite the circumstances. Lead on, Sergeant. As they diverted toward the maintenance access, Reynolds appeared around a corner, moving with tactical precision, his team minus Davis close behind. Colonel, he acknowledged, clearly having come looking for them. Base is under full assault. Multiple breach points coordinated strikes against critical infrastructure. We're aware, Sergeant Miller replied. We're proceeding to secure a high-value asset on the north side. Reynolds straightened. Request permission to accompany you, ma'am. My team is combat-ready and familiar with the current threat. Miller glanced at Morgan, who gave a subtle nod of approval. These men had already proven themselves under fire. Permission granted, Miller decided, but understand this mission is classified beyond your current clearance. You'll follow orders without question. Understood, ma'am, Reynolds confirmed, then looked to Morgan. Shoulder. Still attached, she replied with the grim humor of a career operator. Ready to work. Another explosion echoed through the building, closer this time. The distinct sound of small arms fire followed short, controlled bursts that indicated professional combatants. They're moving through the headquarters systematically, Morgan assessed. Clearing rooms looking for command personnel or access to secure areas. Then we move now, Miller ordered. Maintenance access, then armory, then north side. Reynolds, your team has rear security. Riley, you're on point with me. As they moved toward the maintenance access door, Morgan felt the familiar calm of combat operations settling over her. The ambulance driver persona she'd maintained for 3 weeks was gone, replaced by the operator she'd been for 7 years before that. The transition was seamless, like slipping back into her true skin after wearing an ill-fitting disguise. The maintenance door required a security code, which Miller provided. As the door opened, revealing a utilitarian corridor with exposed pipes and conduits, overhead Morgan took point position, moving with the fluid economy that characterized elite operators, minimum profile, maximum situational awareness, weapon position for immediate engagement. Behind her, Reynolds watched with newfound respect, finally seeing what had been in front of him for 3 weeks, but hidden by his own preconceptions. The woman who had been invisible was now the most commanding presence in the group, injured, shoulder notwithstanding. They moved through the maintenance level with practiced silence, communicating with hand signals and maintaining security at every intersection. The distant sound of gunfire and explosions filtered through the structure, but their route remained clear for now. As they approached the armory access point, Morgan held up a closed fist, the signal to stop. She listened intently, then pointed forward and held up 2 fingers. 2 hostiles ahead. Miller nodded and signaled the plan. Morgan and Reynolds would take the threats, while the others provided security. Simple, direct, lethal. Morgan moved forward with Reynolds close behind, their movements synchronized despite never having trained together. They reached the final corner before the armory entrance and paused. Morgan held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. They turned the corner simultaneously, weapons up, identifying and engaging the 2 hostiles who were attempting to breach the armory door. 4 shots total, 2 from each operator, all finding their marks with lethal precision. The hostiles dropped without returning fire. Clear, Morgan announced quietly, already moving to secure the fallen enemy's weapons and check for intelligence. Reynolds secured the opposite approach while Miller and the rest of the team moved up. Morgan examined the dead hostiles with professional detachment. Military-grade equipment, high-end body armor, specialized breaching tools, she noted. These aren't typical domestic terrorists. They're equipped like a private military contractor or special operations unit. Miller used her security credentials to access the armory. Inside, they quickly equipped themselves with additional weapons and ammunition appropriate to the emerging threat, M4 carbines, with advanced optics, fragmentation, and flashbang grenades, additional magazines, and tactical communications equipment. Morgan selected her loadout with practiced efficiency, compensating for her injured shoulder by choosing a lighter weapon configuration. She also collected specialized breaching equipment and additional medical supplies. North side is approximately 800 meters from our current position. Miller briefed them as they prepared to move out. Based on the pattern of attacks, we can expect the main terrorist element to be converging there as well. Our mission is to reach the facility first and establish defensive positions. What exactly are we defending, ma'am? Wilson asked. A secure storage facility, Miller replied, revealing only what was necessary. Its contents cannot under any circumstances fall into enemy hands. Failure is not an option. Reynolds studied his colonel's expression, recognizing the gravity behind her words. Understood, ma'am. We won't fail. As they prepared to exit the armory, Morgan caught a radio transmission on her newly acquired tactical headset, a voice she recognized as Harrison's. All security elements be advised. Hostiles have breached the eastern perimeter in force. Estimate 20-plus combatants with heavy weapons moving toward the north side. QRF is engaged at the main gate and unable to respond. Any available combat-ready personnel redirect to north side storage facility immediately. Morgan relayed the information to Miller, whose expression remained resolutely calm despite the escalating situation. Sounds like we're it, Miller concluded. Last line of defense. Morgan checked her weapon one final time, the movement automatic after thousands of repetitions. Then we better not miss, she said. They moved through the maintenance tunnels beneath Fort Liberty like shadows, a small combat team against overwhelming odds, racing toward a target they couldn't allow to fall. Morgan led the way, her injured shoulder a persistent reminder of mortality, but her movements betrayed nothing of the pain. Years of operating while wounded had taught her to compartmentalize, to push physical distress into a locked mental compartment until the mission was complete. Behind her came Colonel Miller, then Reynolds and his remaining team members. They moved in tactical formation, covering angles, maintaining security, communicating with hand signals and occasional whispered updates. The sounds of battle echoed through the concrete structure, distant explosions, sporadic gunfire, the chaos of a military installation under coordinated assault. 300 meters to the north side access point, Morgan reported quietly, consulting the mental map she'd constructed during her 3 weeks at the base. Once we exit the maintenance tunnels, we'll be exposed for approximately 50 meters before reaching the storage facility perimeter. Miller nodded. Status report from the facility. Morgan touched her radio earpiece. Security team reports they're holding, but under increasing pressure. Multiple hostiles with heavy weapons attempting breach at 2 points. They've lost communication with 3 perimeter positions. They won't hold much longer without reinforcement, Reynolds assessed. Then we move faster, Miller decided. Riley, most direct route, maximum speed consistent with tactical safety. Copy that, Morgan acknowledged, increasing their pace while maintaining proper security protocols. As they approached the maintenance tunnel exit that would lead them to the north side of the base, Morgan's tactical instincts began firing warning signals. The sounds of combat had intensified dramatically in that direction, sustained automatic weapons fire, the distinctive thump of grenade launchers, the sharp crack of high-powered rifles. She held up a fist, signaling the team to halt, then moved forward alone to reconnoiter the exit point. Using a compact tactical mirror, she examined the area beyond without exposing herself. What she saw confirmed her concerns. The maintenance exit opened onto a service road that ran directly to the north side storage facility, but the road was now a battleground. 3 Fort Liberty security vehicles formed a hasty defensive position, their personnel returning fire against a significantly larger force using a tree line for cover. Beyond them, the storage facility, a hardened concrete structure designed to withstand nuclear attack, was clearly the terrorists' objective. Morgan returned to the team. Heavy contact on our route. Base security has established a blocking position, but they're outnumbered at least 3 to 1. Hostiles are using the tree line for cover, employing fire and maneuver tactics to work their way toward the facility. Can we bypass? Miller asked. Morgan considered the options. There's a drainage ditch running parallel to the service road. Provides minimal cover, but could get us behind the defensive position. From there, we'd be approximately 200 meters from the facility's south entrance. Reynolds studied her. You've only been here 3 weeks. How do you know the base layout this thoroughly? First thing I do at any new posting is memorize all ingress, egress, and movement routes, Morgan replied matter-of-factly. Standard procedure for my previous assignment. Reynolds accepted this with newfound respect. The drainage ditch puts us in a vulnerable position if spotted. It does, Morgan agreed, but it's our best option for reaching the facility without being caught in the crossfire. Miller made the decision. We take the ditch. Riley lead the way. Morgan guided them to a maintenance access panel in the floor that opened onto the drainage system, a concrete channel approximately 4 feet wide and 3 feet deep, designed to handle monsoon season flash floods. Now dry, it offered a concealed route parallel to the service road. One by one, they dropped into the channel, weapons ready, maintaining tactical spacing. The sounds of battle were much clearer now. Shouted orders, the distinctive report of different weapon systems, the sharp crack of rounds impacting concrete. They moved in a combat crouch, using the channel walls for concealment while maintaining enough speed to reach their objective before it was overrun. Morgan's shoulder throbbed with each movement, but her face remained impassive, focused entirely on the mission. When they reached a position parallel to the security team's defensive stand, Morgan signaled another halt. Rising slightly to peer over the channel edge, she assessed the tactical situation with experienced eyes. The security team was down to 7 effective personnel, using 3 damaged vehicles for cover. They were fighting with disciplined precision, but being systematically outmaneuvered by the terrorist force, at least 20 combatants with superior positions and firepower. Security team won't hold much longer, Morgan reported. Hostiles are attempting to flank from the east while maintaining suppressive fire. As if confirming her assessment, a rocket-propelled grenade streaked toward the defensive position, detonating against one of the vehicles and sending a fireball into the morning sky. 2 security personnel went down their positions, now exposed to enemy fire. "We need to support them," Reynolds said urgently. "They're being overrun." Morgan was already calculating angles, fields of fire tactical options. "If we engage from here, we lose our concealed approach to the facility. But if that defensive line collapses, the hostiles will have a clear path to the objective." Miller understood the tactical dilemma. Can we split our force, provide support to the defensive position while continuing to the facility? Morgan shook her head. "We're already undermanned for defending the storage facility. Splitting our force further compromises the primary mission." It was the cold calculation of special operations prioritizing the strategic objective over immediate tactical concerns, even when it meant watching fellow soldiers fall. "The facility is the mission," Miller agreed reluctantly. "We continue." They moved forward again, the sounds of the one-sided battle a constant reminder of the sacrifice being made to enable their approach. Morgan led them to a point where the drainage channel intersected with a larger culvert system that would bring them within 50 meters of the facility's south entrance. As they prepared to make the transition, Morgan's radio crackled with Harrison's voice. "All elements be advised. Main terrorist force has breached the security perimeter at the north side. Storage facility under direct assault. Facility security reports multiple casualties and imminent breach of the outer door." Miller's expression hardened. "We're out of time." Morgan made a tactical decision. "We need to move more aggressively. Direct approach to the south entrance from current position. Reynolds, your team provides covering fire while Colonel Miller and I breach the entrance." "That puts us in the open for at least 30 seconds, Wilson objected. "Which is why we need effective covering fire," Morgan replied calmly. "Focus on the tree line and any hostiles who might have line of sight to our approach route." Reynolds nodded, already positioning his remaining team members. "We'll give you the time you need. Just make it count." Morgan turned to Miller. "Colonel, stay directly behind me during the approach. Match my movements exactly." Miller, despite being the senior officer, recognized Morgan's superior tactical expertise in this situation. "Understood, Sergeant." Morgan checked her weapon one final time, then looked at Reynolds. "Covering fire in 3, 2, 1. Execute." Reynolds' team opened up with disciplined bursts targeting the positions where hostiles might observe their approach. Morgan exploded from the drainage channel in a combat sprint, Miller following closely, both moving in the irregular pattern taught to special operators to make themselves more difficult targets. The 50 meters to the facility entrance felt like 50 miles. Rounds impacted around them, kicking up dirt and concrete fragments. Morgan's awareness expanded to encompass the entire battlefield, tracking hostile positions, adjusting her route dynamically, identifying and avoiding potential kill zones. They reached the heavy security door that marked the facility's south entrance. It required both keycard access and biometric confirmation protocols designed to prevent unauthorized entry, even under duress. Miller swiped her command-level access card and placed her palm on the scanner. The seconds stretched as the system processed her credentials while combat raged around them. Finally, the massive door began to swing inward on hydraulic hinges. "Reynolds, move now," Morgan called over the radio. Reynolds and his team executed their planned withdrawal, leapfrogging backward while maintaining suppressive fire, then making a final sprint to the facility entrance as Morgan and Miller provided covering fire from the doorway. Once all personnel were inside, the reinforced door swung shut behind them with the definitive thud of hardened steel meeting concrete. The sudden absence of gunfire was almost disorienting after the chaos outside. They found themselves in a security antechamber, a hardened space designed to function as a man-trap and final defensive position. Beyond it, another reinforced door led deeper into the facility. 3 security personnel were present, all wounded to varying degrees, but still combat effective. The senior security officer, a battle-hardened master sergeant with a hastily bandaged head wound, approached Miller. "Colonel, thank God, we're the last line. The main entrance has been breached, and hostiles are working their way through the inner checkpoints." "Status of the storage units," Miller demanded. "Still secure, ma'am, but they've got specialized breaching equipment. If they reach the final security door, they have the tools to get through eventually." Miller turned to Morgan. "Assessment." Morgan was already analyzing the facility layout displayed on a security monitor. "The hostiles are here," she indicated a section midway through the facility, moving methodically checkpoint by checkpoint. Standard close quarters battle techniques using breaching charges on secured doors. She traced a route with her finger. "We can use this maintenance access way to get behind them, establish a defensive position at this choke point, force them to come through a prepared kill zone." Miller nodded. "That puts us between them and the storage units. Exactly where we need to be." "What exactly are we protecting, Colonel Marr?" Reynolds asked the question, unavoidable, given the extreme measures being employed. Miller hesitated, then made a command decision. "Tactical nuclear devices, 3 of them stored here during transit between decommissioning facilities." The revelation landed heavily. Even Reynolds, with his extensive combat experience, paled slightly at the implications. "The Patriots aren't just planning a terrorist attack," Morgan added grimly. "They're attempting to acquire nuclear weapons." "Then failure really isn't an option," Reynolds said quietly. "Correct, Staff Sergeant," Miller confirmed, "which is why each storage unit is equipped with fail-safe systems requiring command-level authorization for access or for emergency neutralization if capture becomes imminent." The unspoken implication hung in the air. Miller had the authority and responsibility to destroy the weapons rather than allow them to fall into terrorist hands, even if that meant sacrificing everyone in the facility. "We won't let it come to that," Morgan said with quiet certainty. "Master Sergeant," she addressed the security leader, "your team will remain here as our fallback position. Colonel Miller stays with you. Her command authorization needs to be protected at all costs." She turned to Reynolds and his team. "We'll establish the forward defensive position at the choke point. Delay, disrupt, and if possible, eliminate the hostile force before they can advance further." "And you?" Miller asked. Morgan checked her weapon and adjusted her tactical gear, ignoring the persistent pain in her shoulder. "I'll move ahead of the main position, create confusion in their ranks, eliminate key personnel, reduce their combat effectiveness before they reach our defensive line." "That's a suicide mission," Reynolds objected. "It's what I'm trained for," Morgan corrected him calmly. "Operating independently behind enemy lines to disrupt superior forces is my specialty. I did it for 7 years in environments far more hostile than this." Miller studied Morgan intently, recognizing both the tactical soundness of the plan and its extreme danger. "I can't order you to do this, Sergeant." "You're not ordering me, ma'am," Morgan replied. "I'm volunteering. It's the mission-optimal approach with our limited resources." After a moment of consideration, Miller nodded. "Approved. But I want something understood. Your primary directive is to return alive. The defensive position can delay the hostiles long enough for reinforcements to arrive if necessary." "Understood, Colonel," Morgan acknowledged, though everyone present recognized the professional distance, in her voice the detachment of someone who had accepted mortality as a mission parameter long ago. As Morgan prepared to move out, Reynolds approached her. "Riley," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. For 3 weeks I dismissed you as just an ambulance driver." "I was wrong." Morgan paused, studying him. "No apology needed, Reynolds. The invisibility was intentional. It's how the program works." "Still," he insisted, "I should have seen beyond my assumptions. Seen you for who you really are." "And who is that?" she asked, a rare moment of personal curiosity breaking through her operational focus. Reynolds considered the question carefully. "Someone I'd be honored to serve with under any circumstances." The simple sincerity of the statement reached past Morgan's professional detachment. She offered a brief but genuine smile. "Likewise, Staff Sergeant. Now let's go make these bastards regret their life choices." They moved through the facility with practiced efficiency, Reynolds and his team establishing the defensive position at the designated choke point, while Morgan continued alone through the maintenance access way that would position her behind the advancing terrorists. The access way was cramped, a utility corridor never meant for tactical movement. Morgan navigated it silently despite the confined space years of training, allowing her to move without creating sound that might alert the hostiles in the main corridors. She reached a junction that would give her access to the main facility behind the terrorist advance. Pausing, she listened carefully, identifying multiple voices issuing tactical commands and the distinctive sounds of breaching preparations. Morgan eased open an access panel just enough to observe the situation. What she saw confirmed her earlier assessment, approximately 15 combatants moving with professional discipline through the facility, systematically breaching security checkpoints while maintaining tactical integrity. At their center was a man she recognized immediately from intelligence briefings, James Mercer, former Special Forces, now leader of the Patriots. His distinctive scar running from left eye to jawline was visible even beneath his tactical gear. He was directing the operation with the confidence of someone who had led men in combat before. Morgan carefully closed the panel and considered her options. Direct engagement would be suicidal against superior numbers in a confined space. But systematic disruption, the hallmark of special operations behind enemy lines, could create the chaos and confusion needed to degrade their combat effectiveness. She moved further through the access way until she reached a position that would allow her to target the rear element of the terrorist formation. Drawing a flashbang grenade from her tactical vest, she prepared to initiate her disruption sequence. Timing would be critical. She would have seconds to create maximum impact before needing to move to her next position. The classic hit-and-run tactics that had kept her alive through 187 previous missions. Morgan pulled the pin open the access panel just enough to roll the grenade into the corridor, then sealed the panel and moved rapidly to her next predetermined position. The flashbang detonated with its characteristic blindingly bright flash and disorienting concussion. Shouts of confusion erupted as the rear security element was temporarily incapacitated. Morgan was already opening a different access panel, engaging with precise shots that eliminated two disoriented combatants before they could recover. She disappeared back into the maintenance system before the main element could respond effectively, moving to her third predetermined position while the terrorists tried to identify the nature and direction of the attack. Mercer's voice cut through the confusion. Rear security compromised. Peters, take 3 men and sweep back. Everyone else maintains forward momentum. We're on a timeline. Morgan had anticipated this response. As Peters and his designated team moved back to investigate, she engaged from an unexpected angle, an overhead maintenance hatch that gave her a perfect firing position on the now isolated group. 3 more terrorists fell to her precisely aimed fire before she disappeared again, leaving chaos and uncertainty in her wake. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. The terrorist force, previously moving with coordinated confidence, now fragmented their attention between their primary objective and the invisible threat, picking them apart from multiple directions. Mercer recognized what was happening. "Special operator in the maintenance system," he shouted. "Ignore the distraction, press forward to the objective." But his team had lost the initiative. Combat psychology was turning against them, the fear of the unknown attacker causing hesitation, where before there had been only ruthless efficiency. Morgan continued her systematic disruption, appearing briefly at unexpected points to engage with lethal precision before disappearing again. She was operating in the psychological realm now, as much as the physical, creating the impression of a larger force through mobility and unpredictability. When the terrorists finally rerouted the choke point, where Reynolds and his team had established their defensive position, they were already compromised. Their formation fragmented, their tactical cohesion degraded, their confidence shaken. Reynolds and his team opened fire from fortified positions, creating a devastating crossfire that caught the lead terrorists in a kill zone. The combination of Morgan's disruption from behind and the prepared defensive position created exactly the force multiplication effect that Special Operations doctrine promised. Mercer, recognizing the deteriorating tactical situation, made the decision that experienced commanders make. When initial plans fail, he adapted. Fall back to position, alpha regroup, and approach from the secondary axis. As the terrorists began their fighting withdrawal, Morgan emerged from a maintenance access directly in their retreat path. She engaged Mercer himself, putting 2-round center mass that impacted his body armor, but staggered him backward into his men. The psychological effect was electric, their leader vulnerable, their retreat path compromised, uncertainty transforming rapidly into the beginnings of panic. The ambulance driver, Mercer gasped in disbelief as he recognized Morgan. How the hell? Morgan didn't bother responding. She was already moving to her next position, maintaining the pressure, preventing the terrorist force from regaining tactical equilibrium. Reynolds recognized the opportunity and signaled his team to advance. They pushed forward from their defensive position, maintaining disciplined fire and movement techniques that pressed the advantage against the now disorganized terrorists. Caught between Morgan's continued harassment and Reynolds' frontal pressure, the terrorist force began to fragment further. Individual combatants made the fatal error of breaking from the group seeking escape rather than maintaining tactical integrity. Morgan systematically eliminated these isolated targets, further reducing the enemy's combat power while reinforcing the psychological pressure on those remaining. Mercer, however, was not an amateur. Despite the deteriorating situation, he rallied his core team, 5 remaining operators with Special Forces backgrounds. Push through to the objective, he ordered. Neutralize the woman, she's just one operator. This core group moved with renewed purpose, using covering fire and smoke grenades to mask their advance toward the final security door that protected the nuclear storage units. Mercer himself led the assault, demonstrating the combat leadership that had once made him an effective Special Forces commander. Morgan recognized the tactical shift immediately. Reynolds, she called over the radio, they're making a final push with their best operators. Fall back to the security door and establish final defensive position. Copy that, Reynolds acknowledged. What about you? I'm going to ensure they don't all make it there, Morgan replied grimly. Hold that position at all costs. She moved through the maintenance system with increased urgency, positioning herself to intercept Mercer's team before they could reach the final security door. The confined spaces of the facility's corridors would force them into predictable movement patterns, creating vulnerability, despite their skill and determination. Morgan emerged at a corridor intersection, creating a perfect L-shaped ambush position against the advancing team. Her first shots eliminated Mercer's point man precision fire that found the gap between body armor and helmet. The terrorists responded with coordinated suppressive fire, forcing Morgan back into cover as they continued their advance. She shifted position rapidly, appearing at another angle to engage again before disappearing. But Mercer had anticipated this tactic now. Jensen grenade, he ordered. A fragmentation grenade bounced into the alcove where Morgan had taken position. She reacted with instinctive speed, kicking the grenade back into the corridor before diving for alternative cover. The explosion filled the space with deadly fragments and choking dust. Morgan felt the impact of multiple fragments against her tactical vest and left leg, adding fresh pain to her already injured shoulder. But she maintained operational effectiveness, adjusting her position to compensate for the new limitations. The engagement continued through the facility's corridors, a deadly game of cat and mouse where each side employed the full range of close-quarters battle techniques. Morgan versus 5 experienced operators, all racing toward the same critical objective. Reynolds and his remaining team had established their final defensive position at the security door leading to the nuclear storage units. They could hear the gunfire growing closer as Morgan continued to delay Mercer's advance. She can't hold them all, Wilson observed grimly. Not alone against those odds. She's not trying to stop them completely, Reynolds replied, his respect for Morgan's tactical thinking growing with each passing minute. She's thinning them out, slowing them down, making them pay a price for every meter of advance. The radio crackled with Morgan's voice, her breathing controlled despite obvious exertion. 3 hostiles remaining, including Mercer. They've breached the secondary corridor and are 30 seconds from your position. Be ready. Copy that, Reynolds acknowledged. We're set. Moments later, Mercer and his 2 remaining men rounded the final corner, immediately taking fire from Reynolds' prepared position. One terrorist fell immediately, but Mercer and his last operator took cover in a recessed doorway. You're finished, Mercer, Reynolds called out. Reinforcements are en route. There's no way you're getting through that door, Mercer's laugh echoed through the corridor. You think we came this far without a contingency plan? Jensen the package. The remaining operator produced a specialized breaching device, a shaped charge designed specifically for hardened security doors. Fall back, Reynolds ordered his team, recognizing the threat. Secondary positions now. They retreated to predetermined fallback positions as Mercer's operator placed the breaching charge against the security door. The resulting explosion was precisely controlled, focusing its force against the door's locking mechanism rather than creating widespread destruction. When the smoke cleared, the massive security door hung partially open, its sophisticated locking system compromised by the specialized charge. Mercer emerged from cover, moving toward the damaged door with his remaining operator providing covering fire. They were meters away from accessing the nuclear storage units, from transforming America's worst security nightmare into reality. That's when Morgan made her final move. She had circled through the maintenance system one last time, emerging now from a ceiling access panel directly above Mercer's position. Her descent was silent, a technique perfected through years of covert infiltration. Mercer's operator sensed movement too late. Morgan landed directly behind him, her combat knife finding the gap between helmet and body armor with surgical precision. Before the man had fallen, she was already engaging Mercer himself. The terrorist leader spun to face this new threat, bringing his weapon to bear with professional speed. But Morgan was inside his firing arc, deflecting the weapon with her left arm despite the pain from her injured shoulder, while simultaneously driving her knife toward his throat. Mercer managed to partially deflect the strike, the blade slicing across his chest rather than finding its intended target. He responded with a powerful strike that connected with Morgan's wounded shoulder, sending fresh waves of agony through her body. What followed was a brutal close-quarters engagement between two supremely trained combatants, Morgan, with her Ghost Protocol training, versus Mercer's Special Forces background. They fought with every technique in the Special Operations playbook, each seeking the decisive advantage that would end the confrontation. Mercer had shishis and strength. Morgan had speed and technique. Both had the absolute commitment that came from knowing the stakes were existential. As they grappled for dominance, Reynolds and his team emerged from their fallback positions, weapons trained on the struggling pair. But they couldn't fire without risking Morgan's life. "I've got no shot," Wilson called out anxiously. "Hold position," Reynolds ordered. "Wait for separation." The struggle continued, moving closer to the partially breached security door. Mercer managed to slam Morgan against the wall, temporarily stunning her and creating enough separation to reach for his sidearm. That momentary advantage was all Reynolds needed. "Now," he shouted, and 3 weapons fired simultaneously. Mercer jerked backward as multiple rounds found their mark, his hands still reaching for the weapon he would never draw. He collapsed to his knees, looking up at Morgan with a mixture of disbelief and bitter recognition. "You were the ambulance driver," he gasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "We watched you for weeks. How did we miss?" "That was the point," Morgan replied quietly. Her breathing labored from exertion and injury. "The wolf doesn't announce itself." Mercer's eyes widened slightly at the implication, then dimmed as life departed. The terrorist leader collapsed completely. His mission ended meters short of its apocalyptic objective. Morgan leaned against the wall, the cumulative effect of her injuries finally catching up as adrenaline began to ebb. Reynolds moved forward quickly to secure Mercer's body, while Wilson provided covering fire, and Ramirez checked Morgan's condition. "Multiple fragment wounds, possible concussion, the existing shoulder injury," Ramirez reported. "She needs immediate medical attention." Morgan waved off his concern. "Secure the objective first. Ensure the storage units haven't been compromised." Reynolds nodded. "Wilson, secure this corridor. Ramirez, stay with Riley. I'll check the storage area." Before Reynolds could move beyond the damaged security door, Harrison's voice came over their radios. "All personnel be advised. Base perimeter has been secured. Terrorist forces in retreat or neutralized. QRF en route to Northside Storage Facility." Morgan allowed herself a small sigh of relief. Sounds like the cavalry finally arrived. "A little late to the party," Reynolds observed with grim humor, "but better late than never." Within minutes, the facility was swarming with security personnel, medical teams, and command staff. Harrison himself appeared, moving directly to where Morgan sat, receiving emergency medical treatment. "Status of the storage units?" he asked without preamble. "Secure," Morgan confirmed. Mercer's team breached the outer door, but were neutralized before they could access the storage area. Harrison nodded, satisfaction evident despite his professional demeanor. "Well done, Sergeant. Very well done indeed." Colonel Miller arrived moments later, surveying the aftermath of the desperate battle. "Casualties. 2 wounded from Reynolds' team plus Riley," but Harrison reported. "All terrorists neutralized. Miller looked at Morgan, taking in the multiple injuries now being treated by medical personnel. Ghost protocol in action, she observed quietly. That's why the program exists, Morgan replied, wincing as a medic examined her fragment wounds. To be there when conventional forces need an unconventional solution. I think you've more than fulfilled the terms of your transition program, Miller said. After this, you can request immediate reassignment back to your previous unit if you wish. Morgan considered this as the medics prepared her for transport. The possibility of returning to Ghost Protocol, to the world of classified operations and high-stakes missions that had been her life for 7 years, was suddenly real again. I'll need some time to consider that, ma'am, she said finally. 3 weeks later, Fort Liberty had largely returned to normal operations. The Patriots' attack had been contained, their leadership eliminated, and their remaining members apprehended in a coordinated FBI operation. Morgan sat outside the base coffee shop, her arm in a proper sling, now the fragment wounds healing, but still tender beneath her uniform. Her table afforded a clear view of the entire area, old habits that would never fade regardless of her assignment. Harrison approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. He placed one in front of her before taking the seat opposite. The review board has processed your action report, he said without preamble. Highest commendation possible, though most of it will remain classified. Colonel Miller added her personal recommendation for a Silver Star. Morgan nodded in acknowledgement, knowing that public recognition was never the point of Ghost Protocol operations. And the transition program and evaluation, completed, Harrison replied. You've demonstrated the ability to reintegrate into conventional forces despite your specialized background. The program administrators are satisfied. He studied her for a moment. The question is whether you're satisfied. Morgan looked out across the base, watching soldiers going about their daily routines. For 3 weeks, she had been invisible among them, just another ambulance driver in a busy military installation. Then circumstances had forced her to reveal her true capabilities, to step from the shadows into direct action. I've been considering my options, she said carefully. Ghost Protocol would take you back in a heartbeat, Harrison noted. Your performance here only validated why you were so valuable to the program. I know, Morgan acknowledged, but I'm not sure that's where I belong anymore. Harrison raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. No, I've been thinking about what Reynolds said during the operation, about seeing people for who they really are, not just the roles they fill. She adjusted her position slightly, her injury still making complete comfort impossible. In Ghost Protocol, I was essentially invisible by design, always in the background until crisis demanded action. Here, after the initial phase, I've had the opportunity to operate openly, to train others, to share what I know. You're considering staying in conventional forces, Harrison realized. Not just staying, Morgan clarified. Chief Warrant Officer Reeves has offered me a position developing training curriculum for combat support personnel at Fort Bragg, teaching people how to operate when logistics and combat blur together. Harrison considered this, his expression thoughtful. That's a significant departure from your previous career path. It is, Morgan agreed. But maybe after 187 missions of operating in the shadows, it's time to step into the light, to multiply my impact by teaching others rather than continuing to be the solitary operator. You'd be excellent at it, Harrison acknowledged. Your combination of technical expertise and practical experience is virtually unmatched. He took a sip of his coffee. Have you made your decision? Before Morgan could respond, Reynolds appeared at their table. His team had recovered from the terrorist attack and returned to their normal training rotation, though with a noticeably different attitude towards support personnel. Sergeant Riley, he greeted her with the genuine respect that had replaced his former condescension. Good to see you up and around. Getting there, Morgan replied. How's Davis, back on limited duty? Doctor says he'll be cleared for full operations next week. Reynolds hesitated, then continued. The team's heading out for a training evolution tomorrow. We've been assigned a new ambulance driver, but I wanted to ask if you'd consider coming along as a tactical advisor. The men would benefit from your expertise. Morgan glanced at Harrison, who raised his coffee cup in a subtle gesture that said the choice was hers. I'd be happy to, Sergeant Reynolds, she decided. Though I might need to ride shotgun rather than drive, given this. She indicated her injured shoulder. Reynolds smiled. That works for us. 0700 tomorrow at the motor pool. He nodded to Harrison. Sir? Then he departed, leaving Morgan and Harrison to continue their conversation. So, Harrison said after a moment, Fort Bragg. Morgan watched Reynolds walk away, considering the path ahead. I think so. There's important work to be done there. Translating what I've learned into systems that can help others survive and succeed. Harrison nodded slowly. Ghost Protocol's loss is the conventional Army's gain. But I understand the decision. He finished his coffee and stood. Whatever path you choose, Riley, you've already left a legacy few can match. As Harrison walked away, Morgan remained at the table, watching the daily rhythm of Fort Liberty continue around her. For the first time in years, she wasn't planning infiltration routes, or analyzing security vulnerabilities, or maintaining a cover identity. She was simply considering possibilities. A future where her skills could be acknowledged openly, where she could teach others instead of operating alone, where her impact might extend beyond individual missions to systemic improvements. 3 weeks earlier, she had been invisible, just the ambulance driver that no one really noticed. Now she had choices that extended beyond her next covert operation. The invisible operator had emerged from the shadows not just during crisis, but potentially for a new career path altogether. Later that afternoon, Morgan visited Davis in the medical facility, bringing him a contraband chocolate bar that she knew he favored. The corporal was recovering well, his initial skepticism about the ambulance driver completely replaced by professional respect. The guys said you might be joining us as an advisor, he said, as she took a seat beside his bed. For tomorrow's exercise, yes, Morgan confirmed. Reynolds thought you might benefit from a different perspective. Davis shook his head, still somewhat amazed by the revelation of her true capabilities. 3 weeks. You were with us for 3 weeks, and none of us had a clue. That was the point, Morgan reminded him. The program works because people see what they expect to see. And what they expected to see was just an ambulance driver, Davis concluded, not one of the most lethal operators in the U.S. military. Morgan shrugged her good shoulder. People make assumptions about jobs, about capabilities, about women in combat roles. Davis had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, remembering his own dismissive comments during those early weeks. For what it's worth, I was wrong, not just about you specifically, but about the whole concept. Noted, Morgan said with a small smile. And for what it's worth, once you got past your preconceptions, you performed exceptionally during the crisis. Reynolds is lucky to have you on his team. Their conversation continued for several minutes, the barriers of rank and role temporarily set aside, in the way that sometimes happens after combat creates bonds that transcend ordinary military hierarchy. As Morgan prepared to leave, Davis asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. Is it true what they're saying, that you're considering turning down reassignment to your special operations unit to become an instructor instead? Morgan paused at the door. I'm exploring options, she acknowledged. But after what you did taking on those terrorists, saving the entire base, you could write your own ticket, go anywhere, do anything. That's exactly the point, Davis, Morgan replied thoughtfully. For the first time in a very long time, I have genuine choices rather than just the next classified mission. That's worth something. She left Davis to consider this, making her way across the base to her quarters. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Fort Liberty. The same base that had almost fallen to a coordinated terrorist attack now returned to its routine military rhythm. Morgan found Reeves waiting outside her building, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile as she approached. Just got the official word, he said without preamble. Fort Bragg approved your transfer request. They're creating a special position for you, lead instructor for the Integrated Combat Support Program. That was fast, Morgan observed, though not entirely surprised given Harrison's likely behind-the-scenes influence. They know talent when they see it, Reeves replied. And after what happened here, your capabilities are pretty well established. He handed her a folder. Preliminary curriculum ideas based on our discussions. Thought you might want to review them before you make your final decision. Morgan accepted the folder, knowing that while the transfer had been approved, she still had options. Ghost Protocol would indeed take her back in a heartbeat, as Harrison had said. The world of classified operations, the only professional world she'd known for 7 years, remained available to her. I'll review these tonight, she promised. Later, alone in her quarters, Morgan spread the curriculum papers across her desk. Reeves had outlined an ambitious program combining advanced medical training with tactical movement weapons proficiency and combat psychology. The goal was to create a new category of support personnel who could function effectively in high-threat environments, providing critical services while maintaining the capability to fight when necessary. It was, in essence, a standardized version of what she had been doing for years as a Ghost Protocol operator. The opportunity to institutionalize those skills to create a formal pathway for others to develop similar capabilities was genuinely appealing. As Morgan reviewed the materials, her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, but she immediately recognized the contact protocol, a Ghost Protocol command reaching out through secure channels. The message was brief and to the point. Final decision required by 0800 tomorrow. Return to operational status or accept conventional reassignment. Confirm receipt. She sent the acknowledgement code, then set the phone aside. The timeline was now defined. By tomorrow morning, she would need to choose between returning to the shadows or stepping fully into the light. Morgan stood and moved to the window, looking out at the base where her cover identity had been both maintained and ultimately shattered. 3 weeks of invisibility, followed by a single day of revelation. The contrast was stark, a microcosm of the choice now before her. The next morning, Morgan arrived at the motor pool precisely at 0700. Reynolds and his team were already there preparing for their training evolution. A new ambulance driver stood beside the vehicle, looking somewhat nervous as Morgan approached. "Sergeant Riley," Reynolds greeted her. "Glad you could make it. This is Private Jenkins, our new driver." Morgan nodded to the young soldier. "Good to meet you, Jenkins." "The honor's mine, Sergeant," Jenkins replied with evident admiration. "Everyone's talking about what you did during the attack." "Just doing my job." Morgan deflected, uncomfortable with the attention her actions had generated. Reynolds organized his team and provided a briefing on the day's training objectives. As they prepared to depart, Harrison appeared walking purposefully toward them. "A moment, Sergeant Riley," he requested. Morgan stepped aside with him, already anticipating the conversation. "It's 755, Harrison noted quietly. "Ghost Protocol is expecting your decision." Morgan glanced back at Reynolds' team, then to the waiting ambulance, and finally to the curriculum folder she had brought with her for the day's advisory role. "Tell them I'm respectfully declining reassignment to operational status," she said with calm certainty. "I'm accepting the instructor position at Fort Bragg." Harrison nodded, neither approving nor disapproving, simply accepting her decision. "I'll convey your response through appropriate channels." "Thank you," Morgan said, "for everything." As Harrison departed, Reynolds approached. "Everything okay?" "Yes," Morgan replied, a sense of resolution settling over her. "Everything's fine. Just finalizing some career decisions." Reynolds seemed to understand the significance without requiring details. "Ready to roll, then? We've got a full day of training ahead." Morgan checked her watch, 0800 exactly. At this precise moment, Ghost Protocol was receiving her decision, closing one chapter of her career and opening another. "Ready," she confirmed, joining Reynolds' team as they boarded their vehicles. As the convoy departed Fort Liberty, Morgan found herself in the unfamiliar position of passenger rather than driver. The desert landscape stretched out around them, the same terrain where the story had begun 3 weeks earlier. But now Morgan Riley was no longer invisible. No longer just the ambulance driver whom no one really noticed. She had emerged from the shadows, both literally during the terrorist attack and figuratively in her professional identity. The decision she had made to reveal her capabilities when needed to save her fellow soldiers, despite breaking cover, and ultimately to choose a path of open instruction, rather than continued covert operations, had transformed not just how others saw her, but how she saw herself. The wolf had announced itself, and in doing so, had discovered new purpose.